Today we're going to go into 4.1 Part 1 notes, identifying triangle congruence rules and congruence parts. So we're just going to start off by labeling pairs of corresponding congruent sides and angles and then writing a triangle congruence statement. Now this might seem fairly easy at first because we've already learned about congruent triangles and about congruent sides and angles. So when we have like the tick marks here, like one tick mark and one tick mark, that means those sides are congruent. Or if we have one like kind of a half circle mark there, it's congruent to this one that also has the one mark or the one line. Or the ones that have 3 lines is congruent to the other one that has 3 lines. So we've learned about that part. But the important thing with this and what's different is that order matters for this one. So before you could just write a triangle in any order like triangle LNM or LMN, but this time our order does matter. So we're going to start off by labeling congruent sides and angles. So let's start with sides. So I know that the side with one tick mark on this triangle is congruent to the side with one tick mark on this triangle. So I know that side NM is congruent, and that is our congruent symbol. If you forgot, it's like the equal sign with a little squiggly on top. So side NM is congruent to what? Now here's where the order matters. So we have to say KJ and we can't say JK because our letter N right here is where there is one mark. So you see this one mark here, and then K also has one mark here. And so both of these lines need to start with N or K. And then it goes to the one with 2 marks, so M and J. So M and J both have to be our second letters. So that's where the order is mattering for these. It will also matter when we do our triangle congruence statement, which we'll do at the end. So let's go on to another side. So let's look at the one that has 2 tick marks. So here's our 2 tick marks. So let's say side ML is congruent to, we have to look over here, and we started with the 2 and we went to the 3, so we have to start with the 2 and go to the 3. So it's going to be JI. And then we have our last one, which is with 3. I'm going to say side NL is congruent to KI because we went from 1 to 3. Now our angles, those aren't as specific because we say the angles with one letter. But that's only going to be true in this case. We'll get into a case where that's not true. So let's just start with labeling our angles just with the letter here. So I know that angle N is congruent to angle K. They both have one mark. And I know that angle M is congruent to angle J. And then I know that angle L is congruent to angle I. Now we want to write a triangle congruence statement. A triangle congruence statement is saying that one triangle is congruent to the other, but this is where order really does matter. So we have triangle, and you just put a triangle there for that symbol. N, M, L is congruent to, now we have to make sure that these are all going to match up to what we just wrote above. So N is congruent to what? K. We wrote that up here. So we have to start with K. And then M is congruent to what? J. and then L is congruent to I. And if we notice, this also matches our other statements because KJ is congruent to NM, right? We wrote that right here. Or ML is congruent to JI. And we wrote that right here. And then NL is congruent to KI. So see how that all matches up together? It has to be like that every time. Let's go on to our next one here. These ones share angles this time. So although this is angle K and this is angle I, we can't just say angle K and I. We have to use 3 letters to define the angles this time. So for example, we go from here, let me use highlighter. We go from here to here. So this would be considered to be angle UKI. The letter in the middle should always be where that angle is. It has to go in order. Or if we have this angle right here, this is angle UIK. So we need to label them with 3 letters, otherwise it'll get a bit confusing. So if you can't really tell which angle it is because there's only 1 letter, you have to label it by 3. So let's go ahead and practice that one. So let's start with our sides, and we're going to label each of those as congruent. So let's start with our 1 tick side, which is right here. Now they share that same side. So I'm going to say, I'm going to start with this triangle over here on the left. I'm going to go from 1 tick in the angle to 2. So KI is my side, and that is congruent to, now we can't say KI again, because we have to go from 1 tick to 2. So I'm going to say IK. Alright, let's go on to the 2 tick marks. So starting on the left one, I'm going to go from 2 to 3, so I'm going to say IU is congruent to KJ. Because again, I go from 2, 3, and then 2, 3. And then we have our 3rd tick marks here, so I'm going to start on the left side again. I'm going to go from 3 to 1. So I'm going to go UK is congruent to JI. So those are my sides. Now let's look at the angles. This is the one that's going to be a little bit more different, a little bit difficult. So let's start with the 1 tick mark angles. So I see one right here, and I see one right here. So I'm going to start with the triangle that's on the left. And because there's only 1 letter here, and it's sharing parts with the other triangle, I have to list it with 3 letters. So I'm going to say angle UKI is congruent to the next angle. Now, we went from 3 to 1 to 2. We need to do the same thing with this one. So we want to go from 3 to 1 to 2. So our order here is going to be JIK. Okay, let's go on to our 2 tick mark ones. Again, these ones share other parts. So let's start with the one on the left. I'm going to go from 3 to 2, to 1. So that would be angle U, I, K is congruent to, and then again we have to go 3, 2, and then 1. So I'm going to start on my 3, go to 2, and then go to 1. So that's congruent to angle J, K, I. And now our last ones we don't have to use 3 letters for because they don't share with anything else, so angle U is congruent to angle J. Now let's write our triangle congruence statement. Just like before, we have to keep that in the same order going from, I'll do 1, 2, 3 to 1, 2, 3 again. Now if you did do 3, 2, 1, that's fine, but you need to keep it consistent. So if you were to do, say, triangle J, K, I, 3, 2, 1, you have to keep that the same with the other one. So I just tend to do 1, 2, 3, that's easier. So I'm going to say that triangle K, I, U is congruent to triangle I, K, J. Okay, next we have to identify the pairs of corresponding congruent sides and mark the picture. So this time it wants us to actually mark this on the picture. So we have triangle RQP, and that is congruent to triangle RQX. So I know that my RQ and my RQ is congruent. So that just means that right here, the side that they share is congruent. So let's go on to the next one, which would be side QP and side QX. So I'm going to use 2 tick marks here, QP and QX. And then finally, we do the first and the last letters. So RP is congruent to RX. And then we want to mark our angles. So R and R are congruent. So I'll just mark one mark on each of those angle R's. And then we know that Q and Q are congruent, so I'm going to do 2 marks here. And then P and X are congruent, so I'm going to do 3 marks on that. So we've labeled it, and now you need to identify all of the sides and angles that are congruent. This is again one of those that share sides, so we're going to have to be careful when we are writing these out. Let's start with the sides. And since we already have our triangle congruence statement, they gave it to us, that'll really help us with our sides because we already know that RQ is congruent to RQ. We can start with that one. So RQ congruent to RQ, QP congruent to QX, RP congruent to RX. Then let's do our angles. I'm going to start with the easiest one here. Angle P is congruent to angle X. The other ones we're going to have to label with 3 letters. So I'm going to say that angle PRQ is congruent to angle XRQ. And then I will say that angle PQR, which is this angle right here, PQR, is congruent to angle XQR. Okay, we have one more for our notes for today. So this says that triangle IHG is congruent to triangle TUV. So let's take that, and we are going to mark our triangles first. So I'm going to start with my sides. So I have IH congruent to TU. And then let's go on to the next one. So HG congruent to UV. And then IG congruent to TV. Then let's do the angles. So angle I congruent to angle T, angle H congruent to angle U, angle G congruent to V. And again, you can check these by seeing, so for example, between my 3 and my 2 angle ticks, I have a 2 tick mark, right? And then over here, between my 3 and my 2 angle, I have a 2 angle tick mark, and that's how you can be sure that you're doing this correctly. Let's go ahead and list these congruents here, and why don't you pause the video and try this one on your own, and then I will just write out the answers here and you can come back and check. Alright, so check your answers with mine, and this is all we are going to do for today's notes.